Really glad you're here. Oh, I see more people in line. Well, I'll just introduce myself and introduce Carlos and start. My name is Dee Dee Kamhai, and I am the chair of the Unitarian Universalist Social Action Team. And when we first got together, we decided that one of the things that's really missing for our gringo population is knowledge about where they live. And so we started looking for people who could help us get some information about really where we live. Are you hearing me? I don't think, hello? Is this on? Not very, oh, there. I'm a rock star. Okay. So this is our second annual summer series, speaker series. Carlos was with us last year, and we asked him to come back this year. Last year, he spoke about Mexican culture and who Mexicans were. And this year, he's going a lot further and talking about the political system here in Mexico. And of course, I'm sure all of you know about your political system. Anybody here from Canada? Okay, you do. Okay, and then the United States, everybody else is from the United States? Well, we know what's going on in the United States right now. I'm not going to say anymore. But it should be interesting to see how the three countries of North America are handling themselves. Welcome. We know that there are half of you are here, which we really appreciate, and half of you are on Zoom. If anybody wants to know, I think when you got your registration, you got the Zoom information too. We think it's much better to be here live, so we're glad you're all here. Okay. Bathrooms, for those who don't know, there's one outside, and then there are a few right in the back there. We're going to have one break at about 10:15, 10:30, around there, and we have coffee and cookies outside. And if anyone wants to go get coffee, cookies, water, it's out there, and feel free. You don't have to wait for the break. The other thing I wanted to say is that this program is free for the entire community, the Chapala Ajijic community. So we really appreciate donations, because this is costing us something. So there will be, I don't know where they are yet, but the woman, this woman is bringing some donation jars, and we'd be very appreciative if you kick in a little something for us to continue these kinds of programs. Without further ado, anybody have any questions before we begin? Yes, sir. Oh, cell phones. Thank you for reminding me. Can we all turn off our cell phones? Okay, I think people are still slowly trickling in, but this is fine. So I want to introduce you to Carlos Navarro, un buen amigo. He's a very good friend of mine now. We connected last year, and we've stayed connected. I'm going to have Carlos introduce himself and give you a brief understanding of his background. But the thing that is most important to me is that he used to work for the CIA in the United States, which is very interesting, but he'll explain that. So without further ado, Carlos, you're on.
Thank you, Dee Dee. Thank you, everyone. I do see some familiar faces. I'm really bad at that, but I know those of you who made the hard questions, I know you're sitting out there. So thank you. Thank you for being here. Like Dee Dee said, we're going to be talking about politics. My experience is I indeed worked for the CIA for 20 years. I did that in Mexico. One of the requirements of my CIA job was to live in Mexico to know what was going on. But I did go to Washington and Panama City and other places that I'm not allowed to tell you about also. And I also like to say that this was the kinder, gentler part of the CIA. It was intelligence work, but what the US government wanted was to understand Mexico, especially Mexican politics and economics. But we would speak to US officials, the Secretary of the Navy, or the sheriff in Texas who could not understand our country. So they were our customers for analysis. And then after that, life took me to the office of the President of Mexico. We had a good friend whose boyfriend was a big shot in that office, so he hired me when President Peña Nieto got elected. So I was there for 5 years. The Los Pinos presidential residence. That's no longer a presidential residence, but we also worked at the National Palace. What did I do there? Exactly what I learned at the CIA, intelligence work. And now the Mexican government wanted to understand the United States. And mostly, I usually worked with the topics that had to do with the United States and English-speaking countries. So I would speak to ambassadors and to diplomatic missions and all that. It was very good. The Mexican government also did not understand you guys very well sometimes, especially in the US. Canadians, we kind of got along fine, but the US was really difficult to understand sometimes. The European Union, I had good memories of that time from the European Union because the ambassador was someone from Spain, and we had so much fun. We could really understand each other, literally. So that's pretty much my background. What I've been telling Didi and Larry is that my work wasn't really a covert operation, but it was discreet. So when I come to these things that I've been doing now here in Puerto Vallarta, in Mexico City, I'm hoping to go to Oaxaca. Well, a lot of people don't even know who I am because that was the point, that you didn't know that I was here doing that, right? Now the politics thing, if you'll remember, a year ago we spoke about the states, we spoke about President Sheinbaum, a little politics got in the way there. And don't ask me who had the idea to go a little more in-depth into Mexican politics. So I titled this series today, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, the Mexican political system, a US-based system. Because what I have found and what I've learned is that many of you guys get to understand Mexico easier when we start from a background in the US. So you Americans know the US political system quite well. Canadians, you kind of have to know it. And that we will take that as the starting piece for you to bring that down into Mexico and try to understand the Mexican political system. That's the whole system. Now, don't get all afraid and upset and worried and panicky because politics is awful, yes, but we'll try to make it kind and nice. And I do want to point out that politics can do great things when the people there really want to do them. I'm not sure that's the case lately right now, but we all, politics, we don't always get very well along with them. So I'll start a little bit of the basis of the Mexican system, which comes from the US system, and then we'll move on to how they are different and how things have evolved in Mexico quite differently than they have in the US. But the system is the same. We are a federal democratic republic in both cases, and that is the whole point of learning. So, a couple more things that I will say. I call these Mexico conversations, and I get into trouble with that a bit because more than a lecture where then we have a Q&A session, I, believe it or not, allow you to speak up a bit. And I ask you, and I let you ask questions when things are not clear, when I'm saying things and you start making these faces, or you usually have very good questions that I would not think about from your US perspective into Mexico. Sometimes I just take it as a given that people know this about Mexico, but this is not the case. I'm Mexican, I know it, so there's no reason why you should know it. That is why we're here. And if you want to raise your hand and disagree and not be in agreement with me and be disappointed, that's allowed too. You can say that. We're going to give you as much time for that, but that's allowed, okay? The conversation now, when I was here a year ago, because this is a conversation, I use more of a style of coming and going that's very open. But a year ago here, I learned that you guys are PowerPoint addicts. So you can't work without PowerPoint anymore. So you pushed me into creating slides. So this is important because we are going to see a few slides. Even the videos that I usually show are going to be in there. But that doesn't mean that if you bring up something that's just out of the way, I will not be offended if we don't go into the slide, but somewhere else on the internet or on Google or whatever, depending on what's your interest. And also, we might, because of time, skip on the slides. Depending on how much you people speak, my slides will work or not. You usually mess them all up, which is fine. But if we have to skip it, that's fine. Don't worry. I will know what's really important for you to know. And if, because of time, time is usually our enemy. That's it. And we'll go on, and we'll be fine. Any questions so far? Any complaints so far?
I love to take notes, and I forgot my pen. Can anyone help me?
We have a PSA right now. Yes, someone else.
I'm having a little difficulty hearing you, and I'm sitting fairly close.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Is this an audio? Is this an audio thing that, or should I? Should I just speak closer to the mic? Maybe is that it? Is that better? All right. Okay. Sure. Or may, headphones? Is that headphones or? Thank you. Okay. Yes. We do have another microphone back there with Larry in case someone's out there.
Just a quick question. When you're looking at, the Mexican system is based on the U.S. system, and the U.S. system, there's quite some evidence that it was based off of, I think it was the Iroquois Confederation, the tribal, the northern, and well, I think that any consideration about that would be interesting, but maybe it's too deep for this point, because also the indigenous system in Mexico and how that all fits in. Or
As always, you're getting ahead of yourself. You're getting, if you just let me start my presentation, then we'll be happy to get to that point. But yes, both are important and both we can cover, okay? Okay, so we're gonna be here 3 days as a lecture, and then on Friday, we're gonna do a panel with Mexicans who will tell you what they feel about. I need you on those 3 days, Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, to learn as much as you can, to understand the political system. So when these Mexicans come Friday, at the same time, right here, you can ask them what they feel about their system. You can have the tough questions because now you're going to be experts on the system, and then you can ask them what's going on, whether they like it or not, okay? That's pretty much the layout. Could we have the slide up, Hector? Those guys are doing too much at one time. There you go. Can everyone kind of see there? I'm kind of hoping. So anyway, today, the Mexican political system, a US modeled democracy. And we're gonna have these 2 hours. The first hour is gonna be parallels between the US and Mexican political system. There's a lot where they look alike. And there's a lot that's actually different, even though the system became from the same place. And then the consolidation of Mexican democracy, 1968 to 2000. Those 2 dates are really important in Mexican democracy. 1968, when pretty much the revolt started, and it took us decades to get to 2000, where a president from a different party was elected. That was a big, big change. I have many more dates there that will be important, but if you get those. And then we have from, that's a hard one for me, hegemony to multi-party politics, how we have grown to several political parties. And then the third day, testing the system, the state of institutional democracy in the 2020s. We will speak about institutions and how important they are. It's not just about casting ballots and getting someone elected, but participating as a democracy, okay? I have that one again, just so you remember. This is where we are, number 1, and we'll try to get through with those. So, the first question I'll do, is there anything outrageous or crazy or unexpected that I said a year ago that you remember? I'll give you a couple of examples. One of you came up to me at the end of a little discussion we had about drug trafficking, and she's like, Carlos, I thank you because I never, ever heard in the US that the drug problem was a demand problem, that we were smoking and shooting ourselves too much. And she's like, this is new to me. And that is why we have these lectures, right? Another one I really liked, I was in San Miguel de Allende. I did that earlier this year. We talked about migration and how it's a real challenge. So she comes up to me after the lecture, and what I did then was run a little video with David Attenborough, you know, the documentarist, and he was talking about migration as a survival tool. He was saying humans migrate, granted, but elephants migrate, and the bee whales migrate, and we all migrate. This is what so she comes down and she tells me, Carlos, I'm a biologist, and I had never, ever thought of the border and of Texas and down there as a migration, as an animal migration. So thank you for that. So I'm hoping I did say something a year ago. You can think about, it doesn't have to be right now, that you remember, because I want you to remember. That's really important. And the other thing I want to ask is if you remember the heavy load of homework that I gave you a year ago. For 12 months, you were supposed to be doing something. Let's see if you were paying attention.
Talking to Mexicans.
You already passed. You can go. That's fine. Just, you know, the great, most important homework, important activity tool that you have to do is talk to Mexicans. What does that mean? Talking to your neighbor, talking to your doctor, opening a Mexico City newspaper that we learned how to do here. Remember that? And you're like, this is in Spanish. Like, it doesn't matter. The technology will move your Mexico City Herald into English, and then you have no excuse to come here and tell me you don't know what's going on in Mexico or Mexico City, okay? Those were the two main homeworks that I gave you. If you did nothing during a year, you can come up with you can make it good this week. If you go to the newspapers and you remember how to do that, I'm just talking to Mexicans. You know, I always think that I was giving you the example of swimming. For swimming, you really need to know how to breathe. You may not have the style, you may not have the stamina or the strength, but if you know how to breathe, you can swim. If you know how to talk to Mexicans and ask them the right questions, you will learn about this country. Again, this is exactly why we're doing this. You're talking to a Mexican that will try to explain to you his country, even if in Spanish, okay? Alrighty? So, the question up there is, so are you political? We're going to be talking about Mexican politics. Would you consider yourself a political person? What does that even mean? I heard some yeses over here. Be careful when those yeses come up. You know, generally speaking, I'm saying, are you involved in politics or interested in politics? Or are there other ways of politics that are in your life that you may not be even aware of? Nothing there? I told you we were going to have risky questions. Yes?
I'm very involved in politics. I started in 2007. I started a number of Democrats Abroad chapters that are still going on here in Mexico. And I'm very involved in the voting procedures that we're trying to get everybody here to vote in our November election. And I pay attention, unfortunately, a little bit too much.
Too much for your own good, actually, yes. So yes, this is the high-end politics that we all know about. You know, I've been doing political analysis for many, many years, but the one time I learned and understood what politics really was when in our condo building in Mexico City, 7 stories, our neighbors, my husband and I were asked to administer the building. You know what that's like? You call it those things. They are hell on earth. So I've been doing political analysis and talking about President Obama and Bush and all that thing. And then suddenly, I'm the president of the building. That is where I learned what politics is. We had a board meeting, a gathering, and I said, this is why Congress can never agree on anything. We can't even agree on the color of the garage door. Come on. So I just wanted you to know, this is when I asked, are you political? This is what I'm talking about, because politics is, oh, well, I'm not going to go to Washington to protest. No, politics is happening really close to you, and we may not even know it, yeah? Any other examples like that?
Well, I think just by my existence and using shopping, education, putting kids into school, just we live in a system that's defined by politics.
The school districts are very American. I understood that. That doesn't really happen in Mexico, but I want a home and a neighborhood where there's a good school. You will never hear a Mexican say that, because the public schools are pretty much all the same, and the private schools, you cross the city. You cross Mexico City to get to the private school over there, if you can afford it, right? Cool, yes, thank you. So we have those two, I wanted to show you those two pictures up there. Can you see the differences? Do you know who the people there are on the left? Any fans? Who are you a fan of, left or right? And then on the right, is that anything familiar, this picture on the right? Does it look like anything you saw in the early 1990s in Mexico? That is a Zapatista board meeting in Chiapas in late 1993 when the revolution was just starting. So these are the indigenous tribal rules that you were talking about. This is the tribal people saying, we don't care about the Mexican Constitution. We're going to do things differently. And this is the President of Mexico welcoming the Secretary of State, which we Mexicans say, why is the President of Mexico meeting with the Secretary of State? Can you see that? She should be meeting the President. That's it. There's no one else to talk to for our President than President Trump now. But here we are with Mr. Rubio, right? I don't see our Foreign Relations Secretary speaking to President Trump directly. That never happens. Who does he speak to? The Secretary of State, right? There's a difference there. So I wanted you to see that, how politics move along, okay? It's wrong that she meets with him? Yes? Mexicans would say that, just like, why is she wasting her time with this guy? Well, guess who invaded Venezuela and all that? But yes, in principle, it's like, why is our president meeting this guy? Yes. So one thing I wanted to tell you about is a difference in politics between, we'll go to the US and Mexico and where that's happening, but when you see that in politics is usually very ideological, but especially so in Mexico. There's a National Palace mural there. So US government is very much about administering the state. That's how we view it, we Mexicans view it. I'm not sure that's the way you view it, because a lot of instituting this government, it's about liberty and freedom and all that, but it's also about the efficiency of government. That's how it started in the US, unless I'm going a little bit crazy. And I learned this, I was in Chicago on a conference on the first you-know-who administration, Mr. Trump, and we're there, and the speaker, she's like talking about equality and all that, and then she makes a stop and says, because things have changed. And her phrase was, remember when we had a government? So I think a lot of Americans take for granted the services of government, how government works, the services it provides. Now when we see a lot of agencies being shut down and stuff, you're like, I didn't even know that was there. But now I understand how important it is for the weather, for space, for children in Africa, all of that going. So the US government has a lot to do with efficiency and with services to the people. The Mexican government, the Mexican politics have more to do with ideology, with liberating the people, with going to a mythical place that the Aztecs were looking for, where everything was paradise. It's almost evangelical in a way, Mexican politics. And I want you to remember that for the time we get to how the US system was brought down to Mexico, okay? And I wanted you to see that because most murals that you see here in Guadalajara or in Mexico City will have this whole story of liberation and of nirvana and of getting, and that's really important on how Mexican politics was created, because that has transformed into political campaigns eventually. It's much more like that now in the US, I think, than it used to be. But yes, in a political campaign, you know, when I was young in the 80s, just a kid, 1982 was the year our president ended his term that we'll see him in 1982. And by that year, we were going to be wealthy and rich and first world, and heaven was going to be here, right? Everyone was going to be educated. And we have been hearing those promises again and again every 6 years, every presidential election. And I get a feeling some of you in the US and Canada have been hearing similar promises, right? And here, I just wanted you to tell you, so these are my presidential pictures that I wanted to share with you. But the point here is these subtleties of power. Like, why are people searching for power? What do they get out of it? I'm not sure if have any of you seen the Netflix series with Kevin Spacey, House of Cards, I'm sorry. Did you see that? That scene where, if I remember well, Kevin Spacey is the majority whip in Congress, and he has an employee, an assistant, who decides to go to work. He's a black guy. He goes to work for the private companies. And there's this really good discussion. Remember how Kevin Spacey would look at the camera and then tell you, they don't know what they're doing. I really like that, how that director did that. And there's a point where he says, so they want money, they have a lot of it, but they don't understand that power is what we want. What's really enjoyable when we're here in Washington is not money, it's power. So, meeting with heads of states and all that, you know, I'll tell you, it's really, really nice. I could see the way presidents moved, and I could see Obama greeting President Peña Nieto. I was there. I've heard 3 Obama speeches. He's really a rock star, and everyone loves him. But I see them around and moving and shaking hands and everything. I'm like, they're just as human as we are, I think, right? So there will be things where power is not as grand as the president meeting the president. But for example, I would go with my boss, who was the chief of staff to the president in Mexico City, and sometimes I would go with him, walk with him into the National Palace in Mexico City. And I'm like, again, just like the HMO thing, this is what power really is. So he brought up his badge, gray badge, and he could walk anywhere and no one said anything, and these automatic doors all open at that very minute. That was very impressive for me because I could get into the National Palace, but it wasn't always as easy for me to get there. And then on one of those occasions, there's of course the bodyguards and the officers and all that. And then one holds me by the hand, stops me and says, who is that? Right? A badge will get you anywhere, regardless of whether people actually know who you are. So those little things of power, politicians just love. You know, they really love it. And I'm like, he's the chief of staff to the president, let me go. But what I'm trying to say is, even those badges will get you somewhere. Can you live with that fine? Yes. Can it really get into your head? Really bad? Yes, too. I worked in the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City for many years. My office wasn't there, but I visited often. And then I was Mexican, I had a yellow badge. If you were American, you had a blue badge. You've no idea how many Americans walked like that, like they were the King of England, right? You know, we Mexicans thought it. This is not criticizing the system or anything. This was their embassy. But a lot of my Mexican colleagues, especially Panamanians, because I had many colleagues from Panama, they say, who do they think they are? They're even darker than I am, you know? It's this, but they really enjoyed wearing the badge. I never cared. It has to do a little bit with the way I look, I have to admit, because then when we went to Washington to certain CIA buildings, the CIA would put, so say, a few Colombians, Mexicans, and Panamanians would go to Washington, and then we entered the building there in Northern Virginia, and then there was a sign, ready-made and perfect, and it says, beware, foreigners on premises. Because they knew we were going. I could care less. You know, it's like, well, of course, this is their changarro, right? This is their business. But some Panamanians are like, were really offended. How dare they put this sign? And so what I'm trying to tell you with these little stories is politics is very personal too. People get really worked up and they think the world is going to end because this election turned out like that. And what happens is that in 1982, that president, Mexican president I was telling you about, was a mess. He was corrupt. He brought us into one of the greatest economic crises of Mexican history, and we never reached Verdana paradise or anything in that. So I just wanted to bring down to you those images of paradise. That's Ambassador, U.S. Ambassador to Mexico, Tony Wayne. If you're Mr. Wayne, he was really nice. I really liked the way he worked in the embassy because he had what he called brown bag lunches. So he would say, all of you, my Mexican slaves who work in this embassy, I want to see you this day. I'm going to be there at the cafeteria having lunch. If you want to come and talk to me about whatever you want to talk, I'll be there. We had great conversations. President Peña Nieto had just arrived. I talked to him as a U.S. Employee and then as a Mexican official. Things changed because first I talked to him in the cafeteria, then I talked to him in his office in the 5th floor, right? But what I'm trying to say is this talking to Mexican thing that I'm telling you about, he did very well. He really brought his employee. This was, you know, you want to go and bring issues with me, you could come down and talk to him. That was amazing in the cafeteria, okay? So can you see any parallels? You know, we're not on the topic just yet, but can you see any parallels in Mexico, the little politics that you know or that you're allowed to know, and you compare to the US, even Canadians, because Canadians play a different political game, but it's still political. I wonder if you talk to Mexicans on elections, you see the ballot boxes, or you see the election, and can you see any similarities? You may not have seen anything that looks similar in Mexico than in the US, but can you see anything overall?
Is it mandatory to vote in Mexico? Because I lived in Argentina and they had elections on Sunday and you had to vote or you couldn't get your taxes paid or whatever. I think that's important. I think it's amazing.
You like it, actually. Yes, no, it is not obligatory. It is not something you have to do. But ask me how many people vote, how many Mexican voters were there in 2024? What percentage? About 62%. So how about in the US in 2024? 50, which came up, I think, a little bit lately. Yes, we don't have that, but yeah, it's kind of similar. We'll get to that because we'll see how those elections are managed a bit if we. Yes. Larry, you're not helping me at all. That's all right.
Hi, Carlos. The basic structure of the government, the two governments, so president, it's a presidential system in both countries with senators, I believe, in both countries, and House of Delegates is here?
Congress.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's one thing I want to get clear in my head from this, this series.
Thank you. You'll get that because that's exactly, I just kind of wanted to know, these questions are just, can you sort of have any idea in general or not? This is exactly right. We have a federal system with branches of government, just like in the US. In the States, we have Congresses, and they used to be called assemblies. Mexico City had an assembly until it became a state, and now has a Mexico City Congress, okay? But yes, the system is the same. So we'll move to these three things that I think we can go through. We'll have to do this really fast for our time. Yes.
It kind of irks me when people say Americans, because that includes Central America, South America, and Mexico. And then they say, well, North America. Well, that includes Mexico. Well, the states, but you also have United States here of Mexico. So I'm kind of gave up on the whole, I don't say anything anymore because I'm not sure the best way to I say US, I don't know.
That's interesting because my work in the U.S. government, we would never speak about Americans. We spoke about U.S. citizens or U.S. people or U.S. Now, in Spanish, we have a term for Americans, for estadounidense. Can you even pronounce that? Estadounidense. Estados Unidos, estadounidense. And when I worked for the Mexican government, the term I used was never American, but always estadounidense. But you have a point. I've discussed this many times. One time someone said, you know, we are the only, and I kind of buy it in a way, an American student like you. And she's like, we are the only country in the world that has the name America on its name, you know, in the United States of America. So we kind of have a right to call ourselves American. It's like, how else are we going to call it? There's not a name like United Station. I'm not even thinking that. But yeah, I get your point. I will say Americans. I would like to hear about Canadians as well, because you're right, they're North Americans just like we are. But for ease of understanding, I usually keep it on Americans. And yes, we are the United Mexican States, actually. That is the official name of the country. So we'll try to run into these three things: constitution, electoral system, and history and culture. Those are the three things that both countries have, but that have become to be a little different, okay? So, what's in the Constitution? You Americans speak all the time about the Constitution. What about it? What's important about it? You U.S. citizens speak of the Constitution all the time. What can you tell me about the U.S. Constitution that's important? Or for the U.S. Constitution or any country?
It's supposed to be a guarantee of rights.
Before the guarantee of rights, because remember there were a bunch of amendments that came with the Constitution. But what does the word Constitution mean? Ever thought of that? Where does the word come from? From what verb? To constitute. So the Constitution is the definition of your country, is who we are, how we're going to rule ourselves. And then, yes, come the Bill of Rights and all of that. So I kind of wanted you to, I used artificial intelligence, of course, to come up with that. We have an AI Mexicans there surrounding the constitutions and AI Americans on the other side. But I kind of wanted to make it a point that it's a bit different, okay? So I wanted you to see the differences between, we are both constitutional federal republics. The US is, and Mexico is as well. That's really important because that is how we constituted each other as a nation, okay? Does that make sense? Yes. And then the US, I had the US there because the Constitution was made first. I understand it was signed on March 4, 1789, right? How about the Mexican Constitution? February. Is there a parade and craziness and things going on March 4 in the US for the Constitution? Does anyone even remember that date? February 5th, it's much more remembered. Not as much, but still, we have our parades and the president goes to what city? Where was the Constitution of the US signed? Philadelphia. How about the Mexican Constitution? Where was that piece of paper signed? Querétaro. Querétaro. So I'm saying this because the president of Mexico, every February 5th, goes to the Teatro Juárez in Querétaro and makes this big fuss about how we love the Constitution, it's amazing. And she makes this, and then usually the governor of the state of Querétaro, which currently is always in the opposition, usually in the opposition, also gets a chance to give a speech. So that's what happens. And then, really important, how many articles in the United States Constitution? Is that all? Oh, there you go. Pages, 19. How about our heavier, more beautiful Mexican Constitution? We need 136 articles and 409 pages, of course. Why is that? Why do you think the systems are kind of the same but different when it comes to the Constitution? What makes this a huge book that you can hardly handle, and the other one a pamphlet that everyone gives around?
Is it land tenure? ownership of land? I think Article 17 or Article 19 is about land, and it goes on for pages. Oh.
Because that's like a big addition that came in the revolution, like, right. But yeah, that could be, but it's not really the point. Yes. Oh, there you go.
I believe it's because when Mexico set up its constitution, they looked at the whole entire population, everybody, indigenous and all, whereas the United States Constitution was only concerned about, excuse me for saying this, folks, white, straight males. So it's a lot less because it's a lot less people that are involved.
You're getting so close, yeah. This is a general idea that I'm pushing you to get to. Yes.
What I remember from last year is that the United States is very high level, lots of general principles, whereas the Mexican Constitution gets down into the details and addresses lots of specific situations.
We need to give a hand to these gentlemen who remember, who pay attention to everything I said. That's exactly the answer I was looking for. So the U.S. Constitution says, this is who we are. This is how many senators we're going to have. This is how the president is going to be elected, and left a million things out of it, which makes it a little complicated. We Mexicans love to put everything, including our grandmother's name, into that.
Yes, that's right.
So everything. So how is the sidewalk on this type of urban development going to be? Let's put it on the Constitution. So, and this is why we have such huge books. Yes.
Well, I wasn't surprised because watching a movie with captions, and it's the Mexican couple are in a romantic situation, and he says, "Oh, my blah 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 blah,"
and she's crying.
And down
of course.
here it says, "I love you." So I think it speaks to who the Mexican culture, or what the Mexican culture is. It's more expressive.
That's a very good point, because I was so used to working for the U.S. government. So what's your deal? What should we do? In the Mexican government, it was like, oh, let's say good morning to one another. Let's talk about the weather. Let's see how your grandmother is doing again. And then we'll get down to business. Yes. You know, I'll tell you an anecdote about that because it's really interesting. I moved from the U.S. government 20 years to 5 years of the federal Mexican government. So one of my jobs, my boss, the chief of staff, said, Carlos, I want you to deal with these and these embassies, most of them, you know, Canada, the U.S., Australia, everyone that speak English, and the European Union. And you'll meet with them. You know, if it's the ambassador who wants to talk to the presidency, then I'll lead with him. Everyone else you can talk to. So that was amazing. So I would, especially the U.S. Embassy, I would talk to the political chief and the economic chief, and they would meet with me at a restaurant. They would pay the bill, of course. That's the Mexican way. But what I'm trying to get to is, I said, okay, let's not do this American at 12 or two Mexican at 2. Let's eat at 1, and then we'll discuss this. So we would make an appointment at 1. So the first couple of times that I met with them, I was there, and they're like, you're here? Yes? Oh, we're not ready. I'm like, so okay, well, get your stuff ready. The second time I said, I was right on time. They were there. I'm like, Carlos, we're not used to working with Mexican officials like this because we know they're always late. At least 20 minutes, if not 40. So that gives us time to prepare for the meeting. But then here you are at 1, and you miss. But this is to blame on the U.S. system. Yes, you are absolutely right. Yes.
Actually, when you compared the two and the number of pages, the vast difference in pages, actually a more realistic would be those 17 pages plus the law library of the U.S. Supreme Court, right. Because that is what actually expounds and defines the Constitution.
Very good point. We'll get to that in a second because that explains a lot of how we have similar systems with different law systems, and that makes a mess of both things, okay? Yes, thank you for that. That's really, really important, really very good. Yes?
I'm an editor, so every word is extremely important, and we don't call them articles, they're amendments, enmiendos. So the correct thing on your slide should say amendment, because it's not an article. No, it's not. I just looked it up. But we have 27 amendments to the Constitution. Articles may be something else, but if you want to count them, I just looked it up, but who knows if AI is right.
I love that. Thank you for that, because you can't have amendments without articles. You know, you need to add to the article. But I may have that wrong. I'll check on it. Yes. Did you want to say something? Yes.
I was surprised when you said that. Oh. Okay. I was surprised when you said that Mexicans understand Canadians, but not United States people. And I just wondered, is that because of Trump, or has it always been that way?
Trump has made it easier for Canadians and Mexicans to understand each other. But but it's always been like this. Yes, yes, thank you for that. Well, we Mexicans kind of thought so. We're having second thoughts now that things are changing. But yes, I have been really surprised to have these lectures with some Canadians. I never used to ask who was Canadian and who was American. Now I have to ask, you sit on the right, you sit on the left, so we don't have fights. But yeah, your question makes sense, because we have found that we have so much in common when it comes to the U.S. than as countries per se, right? The U.S. and Canada might be sister nations, but when it comes to U.S. policy and the Trump administration, we have much more in common. I'm like, but you're a NATO country. No, it turns out they treat us just as bad as they treat you, pretty much so. Yes?
Carlos, my question is, there was 125 years between the Mexican Constitution and the U.S. Constitution, and I'm wondering if part of the genesis for the length of the Mexican Constitution was because they wanted to avoid the traps they saw develop in the U.S. Constitution.
Well, yes and no. Remember that we had 3 tries. So before the 1917 constitutions, we had two constitutions. We've had 3, and then we were supposed to get so good at it by the 3rd try. I still have my doubts. But yes, it has not had, the system has been the same, but the way these constitutions have been modified or changed doesn't have to do with where they came from, but how the country changed. Because the system is still federal and constitutional and 3 branches of government. Yeah, we have the 1821 Constitution, 1857, and then 1917. Why was it 1917? What happened in the early 20th century? So we Mexicans love to have wars, civil wars, and end them beautifully with a constitution. Independence, a lot of blood, 1821. The War of Reform in the 1850s, that was a fight between the state and the church, the Catholic Church, and we ended it with the 1857 Constitution. And then we had the Mexican Revolution, even more blood than all the others, and we ended with a 1917 Constitution. That's pretty much the ideals of the Mexican Revolution are kept there in the 1917 Constitution, okay? Okay, I'll go really briefly with this. So in the US, you have more of a state and local system. That's been on the news lately because each one of the 50 states decides how these votes are going to be cast, how they're going to be counted, who's going to be doing the counting, right? Does that sound right? Here in Mexico, we have a federal centrist system. So the Federal Institute decides where and how the elections are going to be held, the ballots are going to be counted, and the ballot box is going to be positioned, even though it works with the local institutes. But this has moved to a centrist federal system. So Mexico City pretty much decides how many ballot boxes there are going to be, regardless of whether Chihuahua or Tabasco or Tlaxcala are in agreement, okay? Really important. Low cost and based on trust. You know, I remember when I was a 7th grade student in the US ages ago, I went with my American family to vote, and all I could remember them asking was not even an ID. Some people came to vote and, oh, he's my neighbor, he's the grocery owner, vote, and that's it. So we'll get into the ID thing, which I think is really important. but not right now. So that's different. It's here, in order to vote in this federal system, you have to have a valid, high security, very expensive ID card that you've seen, right? I think the last time I passed one of mine around, I think. Okay. And then private financing and public financing, really important. In the US, who pays for all these candidates and campaigns? Because the Supreme Court said, sure, go ahead. Well, here in Mexico, that's not allowed. It's all public finance. Who finances these political campaigns? The government sets aside in the federal budget for every election year a given amount for the candidates, depending on how many winners or how many electoral districts each political party won. Where does that not work? If you've seen the news in the last couple of months, where is that getting messier, that not having, who is financing the elections lately? Cartels. Cartels, you're like, oh, Pemex and PepsiCo, I can't finance them, but I can. And then I get the benefits. I get the rewards of having the governor in place, right? So that has been getting in the way. But officially, to make it even and fair for political parties, the system is designed so that the federal budget allows you to have this money. And then when it comes to media and all, social media has also made it more difficult. But when it comes to media, the public, the airtime that is allotted to the federal government is given to political parties during a campaign to broadcast their spots and all those things. So they cannot actually purchase time, publicity time on the air, but they can be allowed to use a percentage of the government allotted time. It's kind of complicated, but it's supposed to make things public, like giving everyone a fair chance. You'll see that in the next hour.
I understand that presidential elections are only go into effect for 6 weeks. Is that correct?
What's going to affect?
The presidential election starts 6 weeks before the election. That's it. In the campaign. In the United States, it starts the day after the next president was elected.
You know, the problem with law and politics is that there's always a way of going around that. So we have a midterm election. When do Mexicans have a midterm election? What year? When is that? When is our next midterm election? Because we're going to be talking about that. 2027. Remember, we have 6-year terms. Our midterms are on the 3rd year, 2027. So we're going to elect a few governors in there. So what the Morena party, who's now ruling the country, has been coming up with, they don't call them candidates anymore. They don't have a primary or they call them representatives of the transformation for Mexico. And this is the name for a candidate. And they are having political campaigns. And so the other parties are thinking of doing exactly the same. Because you're right, the law says not 6 weeks, but like 3 months. They have about 3 months to the whole campaign, the financing, the primary, everything should be really done for expediency, right? But then the party says, oh, no, this is not my candidate. This is the official people's representative of the transformation of the country that we are engaged in since 2018, and he's traveling the country. But yeah, good question, yeah. The law does say that. Yes.
No electoral college, correct?
You're getting ahead of me, but yes. Yes. No electoral Congress. Here in Mexico, who is elected? Whoever gets 50% of the vote plus 1 vote. That's it.
If a new party wants to get started, what minimum requirement do they need to meet to get airtime?
Also to be talked about in a coming chapter. Yes, we'll talk about that, but not just right now. Yes, that's really important. And how many there are. We'll talk about that when we talk about the multi-party system, which is really important. Okay, so we'll go to history and culture and try to see those differences. The US is an Anglo-Saxon, more regulated system, more like in the UK, right? Remember the Magna Carta and all those things that came from Britain? So a lot of that, so who created this US Constitution? They were British subjects pretty much, right? When they started writing this craziness. So it just makes sense that this is a very British thing. How about Mexico? Where did our craziness come from? Spain. So I had a Canadian ask me once, so Carlos, if someone asks you, what is the big difference between our countries? What makes it really different? Why is Mexico so different when we have similar systems and all that? And my answer usually is, and I think this is really important, we have a US-based system applied on a historically Spanish Romanesque society. So it doesn't always fit because things that Madison and Hamilton thought about don't fit here with Morelos and Allende. And so the system and the culture is just different. I have always felt like even though you have this tiny constitution, I visit the US and I always feel like it's more of a regulated society than Mexico is. Even though we have all these pages of constitution and laws and regulations, but we go into the US and I feel like, am I not breaking some rule? That's our first question. I see my Monterrey family members driving like crazy in Monterrey and all the highway, and then they cross into Laredo, Texas. They're driving 65. They're using their turning lights where they didn't even know where they were. So like, what happened to these people? This is a very regulated country. You bet it. So what I'm saying is, I feel it like that when I visit the US. I'm not sure if this is true for you living there. Like, there's all these regulations everywhere for everything, right? I look at the Malecón in Puerto Vallarta, if you've ever been. So there's this concrete plaque there and the ocean. And sometimes I ride my bike, and I'm like, if this was in the US, there would be a railing, a yellow line, a sign, so no one falls over and gets sued. That doesn't really happen in Mexico.
I think of Mexico as being two systems. One is, when I deal with the migra, it's very, very regulated. Everything has to be in triplicate or quadruplicate on paper, okay? And then in reality, for many parts of life, it is basically libertarian. It's do what you want. There are no rules. There's no zoning. There's no restrictions on, if you build a house and it falls down on somebody, that's unfortunate.
I'll give you are absolutely right. And I've been surprised how hard they've been on you expat or immigrants coming into the US, because I hear they want more money in your financial records. They want everything to be in place. I think that's happening now because of what's happening in the US, partly. But you're right, I think the whole deal is in enforcing the laws. We have beautiful law books in Mexico. They could be gold-plated. But when it comes to enforcement, that's right. You made me remember of the World Cup, because you are World Cup experts, I hope. You cannot speak to Mexicans if you don't know what's going on or what happened with the world. So I'm thinking there was one of these influencers, Mexican, he's in LA, and he's like, I think it was the US playing Turkey or something, and he's like, there's a goal just happened here in the arena, all these Americans, look how they celebrate. And the Americans are in their seat, waving their flags. The goal was from the US. And then look at Mexico, and they come to Guadalajara, and there's beer in the air, and people are flying, breaking who knows how many rules at one time, So he's like, so you got it really right, because this is what I'm saying. The culture for a federal system of democracy like Hamilton and Jefferson wanted doesn't always fit with the way we are.
Would you talk about the Napoleonic Code? How that, I've always thought that that's what. I'm from Louisiana. Napoleonic Code.
I didn't want to go that in depth. You're making it hard on me, because let's go back to my slide, Chava. Because what I just wanted you to see, Anglo-Saxon, more regulated system like in the UK. You know, when I think of the Canadian system, I go to the UK. You know, you even have the same head of state, so that makes total sense. Here in Mexico is more Roman, Latin, less regulated system, more Montessori, do-as-you-will style, which is totally right. And then we have a decentralized federalism, in the United States. So the states, it's more of a United States because the states do indeed have a lot of rights that are not given to the federal government. And you guys in the states really fight for those. You know, there's a really struggle. If you talk about abortion, I don't know where you are, but it's crazy because then you cross a state line and then the thing has changed. But this is the federalism that you like so much. We are more centralist with few checks and balances. The checks and balances part is really important. It's something we learned and it took us years to do those checks and balances as institutions. We'll get to that. And then the indigenous reservations compared to our indigenous usos y costumbres, which is customs and traditions. So there are a few municipalities in Mexico, in Chiapas, where the Mexican Constitution is exempt. You know, where some things of the Mexican Constitution do not apply because the indigenous assemblies that you just saw are more important than the actual law in Mexico City or in the state constitution. But in the US, it's different. You know, you just, instead of listening to what they wanted, is my sense, you put them in a different space where they can. These are still Mexican municipalities, but in the US, it's more like a reservation. It's like a, it always is complicated into that. But what I really, more than the Magna Carta and the Napoleonic Code and all that, I wanted you to see that the systems come from different ways. Now, I skip common law and civil law because a gentleman out here pointed that out. So common law, can you see the difference between common law and civil law? I'm sure, because in the US, you have common law, which means that there is a precedent. So you commit a crime, you go to a judge. The judge says, you know, sleeping with men is fine. You can get married. And that's it, pretty much. It gets more complicated than that on some issues, but there is a legal precedent on what the judge decides. Here in Mexico, you decide that you want to not pay your property taxes or your license plates or whatever, and you said, I'm going to go to the judge because this is an unfair tax the Jalisco state government is giving me. And then the judge says, fine, yes, you're right. I will tell the Jalisco state government to not charge you this license plate. But then, if I go after him, then the whole process begins from scratch. I have to do the whole legal system again. While in the US, it moves up the courts, and then the Supreme Court says, yes, you can marry a man, and it's all right and all that. There's a precedent. This is why common law comes from what the judges have been deciding. I can't remember, someone of you mentioned that. The judge makes a decision, makes a ruling, and that builds up, and then we agree what's allowed. In civil law, like in Spain, you have to change the law. If the law, this is what it says, there is no interpretation. This is why we have a huge constitution. Because if the law doesn't state the crime, the judge has not as much power or decision as a judge in the US. That's the difference between common law. So when you bring that political three-branch system that is American design or British design into Mexico with a Spanish legal system, it changes. The last example I'll give you before we go on a break is the guilty thing, that until 2008, you were arrested in Mexico and you were guilty, unless proven innocent. What happened in 2008, President Calderon said, this makes no sense, this crazy judicial system, so we're going to move everything. We had a judicial reform, just like we have had recently, saying the citizen must be innocent, and it is the state's charge to charge him. You know, it is the state's responsibility to prove him or her guilty. That wasn't like that until 2008, and it took us 8 years until 2016 to actually implement that system. Before you would get arrested, you're charged, and then who would decide on this? A judge. A judge could be very, very powerful there. They would not even face you. You were arrested, you were over there in the prison cell. He had a file, he looked at your picture, he didn't like you, you looked like a criminal, you were guilty. That's it. No jury, no deliberation. there was a defense attorney appointed by the state, but all of that was actually implemented by law only in 2008. And now the judge must face the alleged criminal. There must be a file. There's not just a file, but not jurors, but witnesses and all of that. The whole process has been much improved. Why was that such a mess? Because this is how Spain did it. So we kept the judicial system from Spain and then decided we wanted to be a US modeled democracy. So that got us into trouble all of the time. Okay, we'll leave your questions for after the break. One more, we'll have one more. This is a tough one.
So it's not true that Mexico is switching to a jury system? We did. You did do that. That's what, yeah. Yeah. So, you know, when you talk about the judge making a decision, it's really the jury making a decision. Yeah.
And the judge pretty much reading it out. Yes. It took us about 8 years because then, we didn't even have the facilities for a jury. It's not like, come on over to my house. No, we had to build the buildings and the halls and the video systems and everything for those jury sessions to be held. However, that also came into parallel with the system trying to be more open to negotiation or settlement before you actually go to a judge. So the law also opened much more options for you to settle or for the fighting, the defendant and whoever's the prosecution to actually charge. So there's more of a chance to settle. They give you more time, they give you more options. It may be just economic, and to avoid that jury thing that is expensive, crazy, and takes a long time. Okay. Well, thank you. I will give you a break. I think you need to breathe, and then we'll come up back to the political system. Thank you.
Let's try to take about a 10-minute break and come back because we still have lots to cover. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Yes. Is everyone back? Raise your hand if you're not back. Okay, cool. I wanted to come back to this slide just so that you remember that today we're talking about the Mexican political system that is US modeled. We have kind of seen the parallels between the US and Mexican political systems. This is not a master's degree either on American political science on Mexican, but I kind of wanted you, so you understand what's coming, this will be very helpful, the basics of the Constitution and all that. Now, on this second hour, we'll move to the consolidation of Mexican democracy. And I've given you the dates 68 to 2000. So we're going to see how we moved from a hegemonic, is that right? Hegemonic, that's too hard. I need to change that word for something else because hegemonic system, one-party system, to a multi-party, truly democratic system in the early 2000s and all that. And then on the third day, we'll see how that's doing at present, right? So I want to start by giving you a few of these dates. So Mexican democracy, 1968 to 2000. I have highlighted there. If you can't see, it's all right to stand up, or I hope that's not too far away from you, but I'll read it anyway. 1968, student protests, Tlatelolco, October 2 massacre. You probably heard of the student massacre of 1968 in Mexico City. If you haven't, I'll tell you all about it. We're going to move a little more into video so I don't bore you with my speaking all the time. We have a few videos for you to see. So 1968 was really important. It's not that nothing happened before that, but 1968 and those college students who were marching in Mexico City. Remember 1960? Well, you've read of 1968. You've read your history about 1968. So what happened? What was happening? Forget Mexico City. What was happening around the world in 1968? Remember Vietnam? Remember Paris burning with students marching as well? Okay, that was really important, and we'll go a lot more into detail. Yes? Now, 1977, electoral reform. Let's create a little opposition. So you'll see how the president there that I already mentioned, José López Portillo, president from 76 to 82, he won with 100% of the valid votes. Who was his opposer? Who was on the other party? No one. He was the only candidate, like in Russia, like in the Soviet Union, remember? There was no one, so he won by 100%. And then he himself said, well, maybe we need to make more of a show of political parties, so this is not as embarrassing as it is, right? 1982, recurrent economic crisis. So 1982, like I said, it was a very bad economic crisis. We had several before and after that. And economics, you probably know that from now in the US, when people can buy the groceries and can buy gas and all that, that gets into the political arena really quick. 1982. 1985, Mexico City earthquake. Remember that? We'll talk about Venezuela. You heard about Venezuela, what, a month ago, a couple months ago? Very similar, yes. 1989, the Institutional Revolutionary Party, that was this hegemonic party, lost a gubernatorial election for the first time in 1989. So how was Mexico in 1988? The PRI was the owner of the presidency, the political party, and they had each and every single governor of all the states. We had 29 back then and 2 territories. 1990, very important, the creation of the Federal Electoral Institute, which is now the National Electoral Institute. We will talk a lot about that because it's really, really important, that institute. 1994, the Zapatista insurgency. I was just talking to one of you about that. The indigenous people in Chiapas said, we do not like this government, and they set out however they could to topple the government. That's really very important because they were not asking for more rights, and they were actually did not like the government of Salinas de Gortari was then the president, and they went up in arms against him. 1996, another electoral reform that would level the field. So that was really important. That's the National Electoral Institute had already been created, but then they needed all these things that I mentioned about public financing, access to the media, all of that came especially from 1996, that reform. Then 1997, the PRI loses the congressional majority for the first time ever. And Mexico City has its first electoral election for mayor. So we had deputies and congressmen. We have, by that time, 500 representatives. And for the first time, the PRI lost its absolute majority, which usually means they can't change the country and the constitution as often and as easily as they used to do, okay? And 2000, Vicente Fox wins the presidential election. Vicente Fox, who was not from the Institutional Revolutionary Party, won the election. That had not happened in almost 80 years, okay? I'm gonna stop there. A lot has happened since 2000, and we're gonna move to that, but I want you to see how we got to 2000 and to making this transition in presidential power that took us about 30 years or so, okay? That kind of clear? And then I just said I highlighted those because those are the ones I decided we should be talking about. Not that the others are not important. All the electoral reforms, people don't usually like this, but there are those that are profound, and many of those are just cosmetic, right? So we'll look a little bit into those as well.
Yeah, my question is, who's driving these reforms? Because when somebody has absolute power, usually they aren't anxious to reform things.
I'll come back to you on Thursday for you to answer that to me, right? This is a level field game, right? Yes, it's a very good question, and it hasn't been seen. You know, you say, this is why it took 30 years to get there, because there were a lot of players and a lot of citizens and a lot of leaders who said, we do need to change this. What's the path? Without a revolution, you know, because we had a 1917 revolution that changed everything. topple the dictator, the whole thing, but we do not want the blood and 1 million dead that we had in the revolution. It's always better not to do that. That happened in 2018. In 2018, we had a regime change that would not, that was bloodless. That is the one we're in now. But that took so much fewer years, not 30, and that revolution, that regime change in 2018 came here because of all of these things you're watching, because of all of these changes in the law and everything. So can dictators and authoritarian people get to power through democratic institutions? I'll let the Americans present answer that. But yes, this is why these changes have to be made carefully, and they can be abused. A lot of people, Mexicans as well, do not agree with this assessment that this regime now is very bad. There's mixed opinions. You've been talking to Mexicans, so you know. Some people like President Sheinbaum and President López Obrador before her very much. Others just do not agree. But I will give you the evidence of things that have shown signs of authoritarianism as we go. So I want you to keep in mind that something took 30 years, and this has taken 7 years. So there's a big difference there. Okay. So let's go to a promised video.
Que él estaba mirando lo que ocurrió.
So I always enjoy, you've heard this before probably, I always enjoy these video sessions because we Mexicans have had to read Spanish subtitles on American movies forever. So this is payback time. You get to read Spanish subtitles on, I'm sorry, English subtitles on a Mexican video. This is a little bit of the history of Mexico with the people who were there and with the analysts, the people who really know. I hope we can run it right.
Televisa presenta.
You know, when we do intelligence work, you probably heard this, it's all about sources and methods. So I'm trying to give you the source. This is the Televisa News Corporation, which is the biggest Spanish language video producer in the world. They are a bit tinted and pro-government, but I do think they did a very good job with this. And this is just the history back when everything was starting. So it is not from that time, but it's more of a historical perspective. So I think they did a good job. And they have the production means for it, so that helps. Chava, creo que pisé este cable y lo eché a perder. I think I stepped on the wrong cable here. I think you're some. I have to admit. I know. I heard it, but I have to confess otherwise. Creo que fue aquí, Chava, mira. Bueno, te lo dejo corriendo, ¿verdad?
Durante la mayor parte del siglo XX, el reclamo de los mexicanos por espacios de libertad no encontró eco en un Estado que rechazaba a la oposición.
This was not on the script. I'm sorry. I'll go back to the beginning. And thank you
Cuando el autoritarismo
to Jesus for coming here and doing that.
Televisa presenta.
Durante la mayor parte del siglo XX, el reclamo de los mexicanos por espacios de libertad no encontró eco en un Estado que rechazaba a la oposición. Cuando el autoritarismo alcanzó su mayor endurecimiento, se fortaleció también la lucha contra un sistema que concentraba el poder en un solo partido y en un solo hombre. En esta lucha, la ciudadanía propuso las urnas y el diálogo, y una valerosa conciencia intelectual apostó por el ideario democrático y la crítica como contrapeso del poder. Con las grandes batallas ganadas, se logró la efectividad del voto de los mexicanos. Sin embargo, a 20 años de distancia, la democracia en México enfrenta otro enorme desafío: la construcción de una ciudadanía vigilante de las acciones del gobierno y defensora de sus derechos y libertades cívicas. México llegaba a la década de los 60 gobernado por un sistema monolítico y excluyente que había reprimido con violencia a maestros y ferrocarrileros, que demandaban aumentos salariales e independencia sindical. En el México de aquellos años, un solo partido era dueño de la representación política: el Partido Revolucionario Institucional. El PRI gobernaba las 32 entidades del país. En la Cámara de Diputados, la oposición contaba solo con un puñado de representantes, mientras que en el Senado todos los miembros pertenecían al partido oficial.
El sentir de la población era que no se podía respirar. No solamente los sectores de la población que habían sido ya directamente apaleados sentían esto, sino que
He is one of the student movement leaders in 1968, because that's what the subtitle says. But so he's a witness of, as a student of the massacre.
en general toda la población sabía, por ejemplo, que las elecciones eran absolutamente inútiles.
A pesar de las circunstancias, las fuerzas democráticas de oposición, como el Partido Acción Nacional, fundado en 1939, avanzaba lentamente en su lucha. Estos esfuerzos cristalizarían en 1967. Hermosillo se convirtió en la primera capital de un estado ganada por el Partido Acción Nacional con su candidato Jorge Valdés Muñoz. Apenas unos meses más tarde, su correligionario Víctor Manuel Correa Rachó obtuvo la presidencia municipal de Mérida. Pero gobernar desde la oposición no era sencillo.
Vinieron las huelgas de autobuses y el embate de las mafias de taxistas y el despojo de la policía municipal por parte del gobierno del estado.
He was the president, Carlos Castillo Peraza was the president of the National Action Party, the main opposition party at that time. This is the party that actually won the presidency in 2000. We'll see a little bit more of him in the coming lectures.
En fin, todas las barbaridades, el corte de dinero, la supresión de la parte que le tocaba al municipio de los dineros públicos.
Un año después, llegaría un momento crucial en la historia de México. El 22 de julio de 1968, un partido de fútbol americano entre estudiantes de una vocacional del Instituto Politécnico Nacional y alumnos de una preparatoria incorporada a la UNAM terminó en una batalla campal. La policía intervino con brutalidad. El rigor de la represión unió a los jóvenes. Aquel conflicto estudiantil que se había iniciado en la Plaza de la Ciudadela devino en un gran movimiento que rechazaba el autoritarismo y que demandaba mayores espacios de libertad. El presidente Gustavo Díaz Ordaz veía la intervención del comunismo internacional en la creciente ola de protestas multitudinarias que agitaban la Ciudad de México. No vacilaría para hacer respetar su autoridad.
No quisiéramos vernos en el caso de tomar medidas que no deseamos, pero que tomaremos si es.
I think it's clear he's the president. This is his fourth government report, like State of the Union in 1968. And sadly, I have to say he was from Puebla, my hometown. Really? Because he authorized the creation of the Puerto Vallarta, where I live, airport, and it has his name. So we can get rid of these politicians all the time.
Es necesario. Lo que sea nuestro deber hacer, lo haremos. Hasta donde estemos obligados a llegar, llegaremos.
El 2 de octubre de 1968, faltando pocos días para la inauguración de los Juegos Olímpicos que se llevarían a cabo en México, durante un mitin pacífico en la plaza de Tlatelolco, se perpetró una masacre para acabar con las protestas estudiantiles. Ningún responsable fue castigado y se acusó a los propios estudiantes de haber instigado la matanza. 2 días después, en las páginas de Excelsior, dirigido por Julio Scherer García y que representaba uno de los pocos espacios de libertad en México, el intelectual liberal Daniel Cosío Villegas escribió: ¿Saldrá el país con bien de tan dura prueba? Haciendo un balance cuidadoso y sereno, debe confesarse que no se halla un solo acto, o siquiera una palabra de los sectores oficiales que funde con firmeza la esperanza. En señal de protesta por la masacre, también el 4 de octubre, el poeta Octavio Paz envió al gobierno su carta de renuncia como embajador de México en la India. El 30 de octubre de 1969, Octavio Paz pronunció un discurso en la Universidad de Texas. En su conferencia, a través de una crítica firme, Paz pidió al sistema político mexicano democratizarse. La ampliación de su discurso está contenida en el libro Postdata.
Okay, we'll stop there. We could go for hours. I know you'd rather watch videos than listen to me, but this is the way these things are designed. So, you remember Octavio Paz, right? You know who this guy is. Who is he?
I know him as a poet.
Why do we remember him for mostly, like most famous people? There's something he did. The Labyrinth of Solitude. So what did the Nobel Academy think about that book? He won the Nobel Prize for Literature. He's the only Mexican who's ever done that for The Labyrinth of Solitude. But I stopped it right there. Chava, me pones el video tantito. I stopped it there because in Postdata, if you got that right, this is the book where he writes about the student massacre and what he thinks. He became so famous and so important. Could you get what he was doing when the massacre happened in 1968 in Mexico City, where this guy was? He was, no, of course not. No one goes to Texas, but no, he was the Mexican ambassador to India, and he resigned in protest of the massacre. And then, sure, he went to the University of Texas at Austin and gave this speech against the government, because this was a time when you did not step on the Zócalo in Mexico City and said, I'm gonna, you had to go, even when you were a diplomat of the regime, he had to go somewhere. He chose Texas, the University of Texas at Austin, and he pronounced this speech that's right there, where he says, this cannot go on like this. We cannot be massacring our students. So 1968, remember? What was, they mentioned a big event that was happening in 1968 in Mexico City while these students were going crazy. When did they start? Well, that's too hard, I know. October. In October of 1968, when did this happen? October. This happened about 3 weeks before everyone was going to arrive in Mexico City for the 1968 Olympics. So this is no excuse, but President Díaz Ordaz that you saw there was really with pressure on his back to get this country in order before everyone else came and for the Olympics. It's not an excuse. He could have done it differently, because did we have kind of a few protests now with the World Cup in Mexico City? Did you hear that? We had a few student unions protesting the government. How did we solve that? You know, all this history is current because things are happening just like they were in 1968. How do you think the Mexican government solved these student marchers coming to Mexico City before the World Cup? TV, the media. She opened her wallet and gave them 800 million pesos to go back to Oaxaca and everyone else, like a subsidy. But he did not bring out the Marines. He did not beat anyone. She did not do any of that. It was like, so what I'm trying to get you to is we've been learning. we don't want a 1968 again. I like to call this the Tlatelolco syndrome because you Americans have heard of the Vietnam syndrome. I think I might have talked about that a year ago. Anyone know what the Vietnam syndrome is? What happened to the U.S. military after that leaving Saigon? Got rid of the draft. But when was the next war after Vietnam that the U.S. Now you're doing it every other day. But back then, so Vietnam ended, Saigon. When was the next war? Grenada with Ronald Reagan. Tiny thing. But in Grenada, it was like, Ronald Reagan can't send the Marines like that. And I'm speaking of this tiny war and this tiny country. But I talk about the Vietnam syndrome and this reluctance to deploy the U.S. military around the world after Vietnam, because we in Mexico have our Tlatelolco syndrome. The government is very reluctant to deploy the troops, the soldiers, and the policemen to beat students, to beat workers. That hasn't almost never, ever happened. This is why in 2026, when you see the protesters in Mexico City destroying businesses and all that, have you seen that? And then we Mexicans, and probably you do too, is like, where is the police protecting these businesses? Why are we not beating these protesters? Because we're afraid of having another 2 October 1960. This is how important this year and this date is in Mexican history. These protesters blocked the Mexico City-Cuernavaca highway for 17 hours. The first question we Mexicans ask, why are the troops not there? Why are the soldiers, the federal police, the state police opening one lane for people who actually need to go to the hospital? We don't want to beat anyone. We want to use roses petals to deal with them, and that comes at a price, which is usually money. This is how things are usually resolved. When I was a presidential advisor back in the day, I'd say the president would come, these protesters are not going to block that highway again while I'm president. And my advice to his chief of staff would be, the president can go and say those things because first, no one believes them, and second, he's not going to do them. Sure enough, the next day, the highway was blocked and there was no one opening up that lane that everyone wanted. So, this is really bad. It has an explanation. I don't think this is the way we should do it. But also, the Mexican government has learned, Mexican administrations have learned to deal with protests like that. Because this is still happening. What just happened in India, did you hear? Just a week ago or a couple, what happened to the protesters? Were they slaughtered? Well, they actually got the education minister out of his post. A few of them were hit. Now, we talk about Iran, well, that's a bloodbath when that thing. But in India, what I'm saying is these student protests and things are going to continue forever. We just need to learn how to manage them better. This was really bad. The president was under pressure. He sent out the troops. The signal was the wrong one, and they were allowed that. And have you ever heard of the Ayotzinapa case? The college students, the 43 students that were lost. So that happened in 2014. That's been recurrent. Again, students missing on a bus, being killed. Where do you think those students from Guerrero were traveling to when they were killed and kidnapped and the whole thing? They were going to Mexico City for the 2 October 1968, 2014 commemoration, right? So I want you to remember that year because it's really, really in Mexican vein. And just so you really believe what I just said, we're going to show a little more detail on that. I just wanted to show you the crudeness and what actually happened in that massacre in 1968.
Se cumplen 55 años de la matanza de
You need to
Tlatelolco.
tell us, yes.
La tarde de aquel miércoles 2 de octubre de 1968, la Plaza de las Tres Culturas fue el escenario del mitin estudiantil del Consejo Nacional de Huelga. Miles de estudiantes, también hombres, mujeres y niños y ancianos, se congregaron en Tlatelolco. Los estudiantes pedían el fin de la represión policíaca, respeto a la autonomía universitaria y mayor libertad de expresión. A los pocos minutos de haber empezado el acto, el ejército armado, con tanques, pistolas, metralletas y rifles de alto poder, rodeó la zona. Los líderes del Consejo Nacional de Huelga, que se encontraban en el edificio Chihuahua, informaron que se suspendía la marcha programada al casco de Santo Tomás. Entre la multitud se habían infiltrado vestidos de civiles, agentes del Batallón Olimpia que usaban como contraseña un pañuelo blanco envuelto en la mano derecha. Los estudiantes no pretendían enfrentarse con las fuerzas del orden. El acto era pacífico. Un poco antes de las 6 de la tarde, varias luces de bengala iluminaron el cielo. Luego inició una balacera. Testigos aseguraron que los integrantes de la llamada Brigada Blanca fueron los primeros en disparar contra la multitud que estaba en el lugar y contra el edificio Chihuahua, donde estaban los líderes del Consejo Nacional de Huelga. Los disparos surgían de todas direcciones. El tableteo de las ametralladoras continuó toda la tarde hasta la noche. Los estudiantes buscaron refugio en los edificios de Tlatelolco. Muchos fueron detenidos y algunos más murieron en su huida. A 55 años de distancia, no hay certeza del número de muertos. El 2 de octubre no se olvida. Noticias N+.
So I have a Tlatelolco witness. He tells me he was there. How was that? How many students did you shoot?
I just run so fast. Yeah. Because I start to hear this shooting, and I was with my brothers.
I'm impressed this has never happened to me talking about Tlatelolco. So this was on October 2, or because you did understand that there was a few weeks, if this was the end of it, but we had been going with the protests for a while. Were you involved in the protests?
Yeah, we were there, and we saw these guys shooting from the buildings after the Bengala. The Bengala was the signal to shoot. But the idea wasn't just to protest, not to fight, because we were just students. But they started shooting, and everybody died. And you had to protect, I saw bodies there, and you had to protect. How many people? Nobody knows.
We will never know. And those that were not killed and captured did not do very well. Yeah, they were questioned and the whole thing.
Now the leaders of that are in Morena. Yes. Hey, they were government.
The leaders of the student movement are now in the regime, are in the part of the government. This is also what happens often, yes. Thank you for that, because I just kind of wanted you to see this is a real thing. Of course, I'm biased because 1968 is the year I was born. So this is how old we are. So I will never forget it. So, and you know how politicians move things. Can you remember the name of the battalion that did this killing? Did you get that? Yes, that was their informal name. But the Olympia Battalion. Yeah. You know, when I put videos for you, this is hard work. I'm going to come back to you with questions, but I want you to see how the Olympics was so much ingrained into this decision that the battalion that was dispatched to kill them was called Olympia. what's the message? We need to have these Olympics going the right way. And I bet you most of the people in the world don't remember to October as they do the Olympics. So politically speaking, it's hard to say, it's difficult to say, but they were very successful. They actually did it, you know, they got rid of everyone. The plaza there, the Tres Culturas Square, anyone's been there? It's called Tres Culturas, three cultures, because we have pyramids, we have colonial churches, and we have modern Mexico buildings on the side. And the plaza was, the firemen was sent with hoses to clean up, and by the next afternoon, everything was like, nothing happened here. So that's still happening. It's really bad. So, and I also want you to understand that this need for democracy and change and fair elections doesn't just come out of nowhere. There are reasons why Mexicans have been demanding that for years. Another reason is the earthquake. Remember that? Oh, the massacre in Mexico. We have Elena Poniatowska. Is, some people don't like her very much, but she has written a lot of books about Mexico. She was born in Paris, but she's been in Mexico all of her life. And this is the book she wrote back then about a massacre in Mexico, Elena Poniatowska. This is the English language edition that I was careful to put there in case you want to read something about it. Get your hands full of blood in that book, you can do it. She does a very good job. She is very much part of the government, like Carlos here says. So a lot of people don't like her very much, but she has done a lot of work. She's like 92, but she's still around, she's still writing, and she's very close to the president as well, just so you know, in case you want to read that. So, we're still in the tragedy chapter, but I hope I don't lose you. And this is 1985.
En 1985, Octavio Paz dijo: "El temblor nos ha redescubierto un pueblo que parecía oculto por los fracasos de los últimos años y por la erosión moral de nuestras élites. Un pueblo paciente, pobre, solidario, tenaz, realmente democrático y sabio. Y es que en las zonas más afectadas de la ciudad, el centro histórico y barrios populares del entorno como las colonias Guerrero, Tepito y Morelos, los vecinos, asociaciones civiles y grupos religiosos se pusieron a trabajar codo con codo frente a la parálisis del gobierno y a la intención de algunos sectores de desalojar las áreas dañadas para emprender una modernización urbana del viejo corazón de la capital. Optaron por que la gente no saliese de sus barrios, acampando en tiendas, y presionar a favor de la expropiación de esos terrenos para la ejecución de un plan austero y funcional de reconstrucción de vecindades. Sin pedir permiso, empezamos a construir proyectos modelo en cada colonia", cuenta Jorge Jiménez, que participó en el proceso como miembro de Casa y Ciudad, un colectivo de arquitectos jóvenes. Una de las pruebas de la gangrena institucional develada por el sismo fue la cantidad de edificios públicos que se vino abajo. En una de sus crónicas, Comas citaba la conversación que escuchó entre dos policías rasos ante las ruinas de un hospital. "Fíjate la viga que utilizaron para el edificio. Se utiliza solo para las viviendas. Los ingenieros que hicieron esto no tienen madre". El otro le replicaba más drásticamente: "¿Cuánto dinero se ahorraron estos cabrones?". En un artículo, Octavio Paz condenaba más poéticamente la megalomanía de los últimos gobiernos empeñados en levantar en un parpadeo sexenal Babilonias de cemento del tamaño de su vanidad. Los cimientos de esas moles estaban podridos, como la moral de los que las erigieron. En 1985, además de ser un desastre natural, también fue un hito político. El viejo régimen del PRI, liderado entonces por Miguel de la Madrid, había llegado deteriorado a los años 80 y el terremoto desnudó su falta de capacidad de reacción institucional más su desconexión de la población. La respuesta inmediata de la capital al cataclismo fue, según lo resumió Comas, orden civil frente al desorden oficial. O en versión del escritor Carlos Monsiváis, en un artículo de esas fechas en la revista Proceso: "El 19, y en respuesta ante las víctimas, Ciudad de México conoció una toma de poderes de las más nobles de su historia, que trascendió con mucho los límites de la mera solidaridad, la conversión de un pueblo en gobierno y el desorden oficial en orden civil. Democracia puede ser también la importancia súbita de cada persona. Hoy recordamos, 30 años después, el terror que debieron haber vivido las personas que estaban en la capital, y en memoria de los 10,000 muertos y 6,000 desaparecidos, según cifras oficiales que dejó el terremoto. Un abrazo para todas aquellas personas que vivieron esta terrible tragedia en México.
So Americans usually ask each other, where were you on 9/11? What were you doing? Mexicans can ask each other, where were you in September 1985 when this thing happened? Had you heard? You have heard of this earthquake, right? Where were you in 1985 when this happened? Did you send a can of beans to Mexico City? Or was someone you knew there, close, or in the country? Any impressions of that? You know, this is, I'm putting this into our political talk because it often happens that these things happen and we tend to forget the political implications, which is exactly what I want you to focus on today. Because we can move to Venezuela today. Who is governing Venezuela as we speak? Really? Delcy Rodriguez? Is she? You got a passing grade. Anyway, what I'm seeing in Venezuela is a lot of what happened here. So what happened in Mexico City in 1985, this was a terrible earthquake. All of that you saw on the images happened. And the government's reaction was, we don't know what to do. We don't have the tools. We'll send the troops to keep order. We'll send the soldiers to be there guarding stuff. And then we'll remember also Gaza. We'll just get everything, all this rubble, and then we'll create a new beautiful city that everyone can participate in and buy in, but we will be the owners of that land. So I want you to see all these issues. If you were there and your apartment came crashing down, there was no one to help you. The government was not there to rescue the corpses. The government was not there to get you a new mortgage, some financial assistance, something. But the government was there to limit you, to bang on you so you wouldn't get into this plan process. People did not like that. Remember what Octavio Paz said and what some of the analysts have said is that this was like a rebellion for the Mexican people. The Mexican people said, we need to do something so this inaction by the government, they mentioned the president, Miguel de la Madrid then, and he said, we need a government that works for us. This goes to the US model that I mentioned an hour ago about government efficiency and services for the country. This has more to do with that. We need a government that is efficient, that when something happens, is there to help us, the citizen. Not defunding FEMA, say. Not forgetting about what happens on those wildfires and all that. So here in Mexico is the same. A new tomorrow we'll speak, I think it's tomorrow, we'll talk about institutions because many of these things, terrible history that I'm giving you, resulted in better government policy pushed by better institutions. Independent institutions, autonomous institutions that we've been losing recently, as has been the case in the US. That's why I always insist when you see what's happening in the US and bring it down to Mexico, you will better understand Mexico. But the result of this, back in the 80s, was better institutions. Coordination, emergency services that were there but were not coordinated or funded. And the government said, shucks, we need to do this. And the people said, we need a new government. We need a democratic system that will move this government out of the way, right? Am I depressing you enough? Any questions so far? Yes.
So you're saying the earthquake hastened the demise of the PRI, but it was 12 more years before they were out.
Yes.
So they didn't get rid of them right. They didn't get rid of them right away.
Remember I said, I'm saying 30 years it took us. It was like 2 college degrees to get there or something. It took us a very long time. And remember, one of the big explanations for that is we did not want violence, because these people wanted homes and property, deeds and rights and all that, but they were not up in arms against the government. This is why these peaceful revolutions take so long. And who knows what would have happened if the Zapatistas or the Tlatelolco victims or the earthquake victims would have done more, right? So just almost to get to the end of today, which is the 2000 Vicente Fox election, I do want to go back to the experts. We'll go back to a series of documentaries we were already watching, so that you can kind of understand what happened after this. Did those come out big enough for you guys? I'm not sure what I did, but they came huge, which I guess is good. Yes. So tomorrow we'll move more to the details of these electoral reforms that brought us these changes. But today I just wanted you to see the overall view all the way to 2000, when a big democratic change happened, and kind of understand the pieces. We'll go into the details. So now we're going to see, before we discuss a little bit the election of Vicente Fox, which was a big thing, we have these analysts and journalists talking about the expectations of that Vicente Fox election. One thing to remember while watching this is that democracy always creates great expectations, big expectations, if not excessive expectations. And democracy is usually really bad at meeting all of them. So this is what this is about. They're talking about Vicente Fox already becoming president and all that, and we'll go a bit more into that. But not move all the way to 2000, even though some other steps happened. The Zapatista revolution was there in 1994. I don't want to go to there just now. I think you've heard more about that than these others, but we can talk about the 1994 Zapatista revolution on the first day of that year was also a big change for the government. Like, we need to change some things, right?
Televisa presenta.
Uno de los grandes problemas de la democracia, por el que pasamos ahora mismo, es que le hemos cargado demasiadas expectativas.
Tenemos sobre todo una clase política que nos parece abyecta, pero que nos parece que es ajena a nosotros.
Creo que la desigualdad económica y la desigualdad jurídica abre paso a opciones no democráticas.
Yo creo que es una pregunta que hay que responderla georreferenciadamente.
Participar en democracia es estar en tu día a día consciente de las libertades, defenderlas en cualquier momento y también procurar que se respeten.
No hay fraude electoral. Las instituciones públicas que ya se han desarrollado en nuestro país precisamente dieron certeza de que eso no sucede.
La cuestión es definir el fraude electoral.
De verdad hay gente que no tiene las necesidades básicas cubiertas, y si te ofrecen 500 pesos, pues bueno.
La democracia es por naturaleza imperfecta y digna de ser cuestionada todo el tiempo.
La democracia sí es la mejor forma de gobierno. Claro que lo es.
Justo ahora, el propio IFE nos ha comunicado a todos los mexicanos que cuenta ya con información ciertamente preliminar, pero suficiente y confiable para saber que el próximo presidente de la República será el licenciado Vicente Fox Quesada.
Tenía una alegría, tenía un frenesí, me parecía que estaba empezando algo interesante y sí, tal cual, recuerdo como una fiesta.
Creo que se percibía en el ambiente político, social, en la calle, un ánimo de algo va a pasar, va a haber, se puede cambiar.
Aquellos primeros momentos en donde nos dimos cuenta todos que la alternancia había ocurrido y comenzaba la transición tan anhelada en México, me emocionaron profundamente.
Era un cambio absolutamente, uno, bienvenido, y dos, dramático, porque no sabíamos qué pasaba después de eso, no sabíamos qué era vivir sin el PRI.
La viví, yo creo que como muchos mexicanos, con mucha esperanza de ver por primera vez un cambio.
Y fue un momento de esperanza porque precisamente esperábamos que el PRI se fuera, que no volviera.
Ese día fue un día mágico, ¿no? Fue un día como que aparentemente salió el sol en este país, por lo menos en la esperanza, en la ilusión de que las cosas podían cambiar.
Y recuerdo también muchísimo este grito de la gente hacia Fox de "no nos falles".
No nos falles, which means do not betray us. Be good on your promises. No nos falles. I don't think the translation came quite right, but just wanted to make it sure. Six years later, when the dinosaur woke up, when he woke up, the dinosaur was still
Después de 6 años o del sexenio de Vicente Fox, acabamos todos reflejándonos en ese espejo de la indignación y de la frustración con un hombre.
This young guy is the current Mexican ambassador to Italy. So he's moved up.
Que creo que traicionó muchos de los ideales que lo llevaron a Los Pinos.
Le costó mucho tiempo y mucho trabajo a este país desde las instituciones y desde las calles lograr esa alternancia para que este señor no supiera lo que tenía en las manos y lo tirara a la basura.
En lugar de inmediatamente cambiar este sistema, aprende a vivir en él. Y aprenden con las mismas mañas, con las mismas formas, con los mismos recovecos, con las mismas lagunas legales.
Me irrita, me duele, me enoja la manera como la transición en muchos sentidos resultó fallida.
Realmente no se desmanteló una estructura, la negociación política sigue estando centralizada en oficinas de reforma, en pisos muy elevados que se toman decisiones a las 11 de la noche entre 6 y 7 personas. Hay chantaje político, no hay realmente una situación en la que la democracia como una promesa de resolución de conflictos viva y exista en el día a día de la gente.
Podríamos juzgar muchísimas cosas de Vicente Fox, pero yo destacaría si hay algo que hoy podemos palpar, es la apertura a la libertad de expresión. Sí recuerdo haber crecido en un México en el que no podías hablar mal del presidente.
Entonces, como en toda transición, dice la frase, ¿no? No acaba de morir algo y no acaba de nacer lo que sigue, ¿no? Entonces, pero sin embargo hay esa libertad en la que el gobierno se empieza a meter menos en la prensa. Creo que hay una buena intención e incluso la construcción de una institución, por lo menos el apuntalar una institución que vigile al gobierno, que es el Instituto de Transparencia, ¿no? El primer IFAI, ¿no?
Creo que la democracia, o uno de los grandes problemas de la democracia, por el que pasamos ahora mismo, es que le hemos cargado demasiadas expectativas, ¿no? Es la promesa democrática y creemos que con ella va a venir igualdad, justicia, felicidad, mejor distribución económica, ¿no? Y eso no representa necesariamente la democracia.
18 años después hay una tentación del desencanto, digamos, hay una tentación por decir nada funcionó, no se logró lo que queríamos. Por supuesto que no se logró lo que queríamos porque lo que queríamos era enorme, lo que queríamos era un país nuevecito y completo y pues no tenemos un país nuevecito.
Yo sé que aquí...
Okay, we could go on. I see you're interested, but time will not let us. So let's close our presentation talking about this election in the year 2000. I think it makes total sense. And let's see if you were paying attention. We have a quiz as usual. So could you see the video is divided in two parts. When he was elected in July of 2000 and when he finished his administration, which was when? 2006. We have elections in July usually, and the president takes office in December. Now that's changed. President Sheinbaum took office in October, but the election was still in July. So you just heard a bunch of Mexicans talk about this transition in 2000 that was so important. What had Mexicans to say about that election result then? What was their mood then, these Mexicans you heard?
Great expectations, hopeful.
You even have a book title with you and all. Cool. Great expectations. Yes, what else? Hopeful, yes. Euphoric, nice. Bring it up, what else? Mexicans went to vote in July after making 25 years or 30 years of electoral changes, of going to vote knowing that nothing was going to happen. They learned, they demanded. I'll tell you, what did they demand? A transparent ballot box. You have no idea what a change that made in Mexicans' elections. There used to be boxes, like everywhere else in the world. Like one of the big demands that it took years to get to a voting station was a transparent ballot box. Transparent, plastic, so that when it gets there, it's empty, and then when you get your vote, you put your vote in, you cast your vote, you see it fall. You have no idea. It's the stupid things you would say, but you have no idea how much that changed. And all of that, all of those little things, and you'll learn about them tomorrow. But this is why I wanted you to see this first. Tomorrow when we talk about the electoral changes and all the things that we had to do to get to here, you know where we're headed. We're headed to the year 2000 on this clean, fair election, much better than we had ever had.
The end of the corruption.
The end of the corruption. Did you see that PRI pre-party casket being heralded? We thought the PRI would die, and it would not die. That's why, the dinosaur thing, I'm not sure if you heard, they say this is the world's shortest novel. When he woke up, the dinosaur was still there. So they put that there because it's like, turns out the PRI was still there, very much. So what happened? You're Vicente Fox. You have been the governor of the state of Guanajuato. You're in politics. You know how to defeat the system. You win the presidency. What are the biggest obstacles? You Latin American experts. Who was here in 2000 living in Mexico when this happened? Anyone? There you go. You could feel it. So you're this Democrat. You come from the opposition. Your name is Fox, which the U.S. government loves for some reason. They finally have a president they can talk to because he's Fox. But what is and you guys are experts on Latin America. So you're there, you're the president already. What about everyone else below you? What's going on down there? There's my cabinet, everyone's beautiful, everyone says hello, but under there, who is loyal to whom all the way down there in the agriculture department's subsidies section C?
It was the people that were in charge before he ever got there. You can't change a system from the top if the bottom's already corrupt.
Big challenge, isn't it? So, you made that very clear. Now I'm going to be a little harder on you. Of all these people down there, who do you need to pay special, particular attention to? Who can actually bring you down if they really set their minds to do that? Of all your government setup. The clerks. Yes, but not really. Who has the guns? The soldiers. I'm sorry, I didn't hear. You need to shout out. Yes, one of the big good things that Vicente Fox did was negotiate with the military and keep them there and convince them that he was the commander-in-chief. If you see Latin America, that almost never happens. We have had so many coups and stuff and revolutions around Latin America because of the soldiers. So he was, he appointed a defense secretary who in Mexico is a general. Have you noticed we don't have a civilian we have a general who is the defense secretary, and he said, so let's have a talk. Who do you want as secretary? I'll appoint whoever, unless he's really crazy. And he said, well, we want this guy. And he said, and then he worked with him. This is an accomplishment in Mexico, in Latin America. This almost never happens. So people who criticize him, he did nothing. Well, yes, could he have done a lot? I think so. Was he a great president? Maybe not. But one of the big achievements was changing this regime after 80 years without a new revolution, without a new constitution, right? He actually was able to work with them. And yes, he was on the center right. He was pro-business. He was deregulating things. He was doing a lot of things that the left did, as everywhere else, that he did not like. But I want you to keep in mind that these soldiers they said, okay, we have a new commander-in-chief. He seems nice. We'll go along. And that was an achievement.
First time I ever heard of Vicente Fox was past his presidency when Trump said, Mexico's going to pay for the wall. My Mexican friend sent me a video of him using an expletive about Donald Trump. We are not going to pay for the wall. And I went, I like that guy. Is he the president? No, he's the past president, because Peña Nieto was in that. It was so funny.
Careful with Peña Nieto, who was my boss. But yes, Peña Nieto. It's good that you bring that up, because Peña Nieto, one of the things I really criticized him when he was my boss, remember that campaign in 2016? For some reason, President Peña in Mexico was advised to invite the candidates, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, to Mexico City. And everyone is like, why is the president inviting candidates who are not? So, of course, Hillary Clinton, who lives kind of in the normal world, she's like, I don't need to go to Mexico City. My voters are in Iowa and whatever, right? But Donald Trump said, oh, I like the cameras. I am going to go. So this was the first. Peña Nieto, the Mexican president, welcomes him in the presidential residence. And for the first time ever, you guys see him in the presidential podium speaking to reporters and people. The first time you ever saw Donald Trump visiting a foreign head of a state and kind of delivering a president with the Mexican seal and everything was in Mexico City. What did he do that afternoon, Donald Trump? He flew back to Arizona to say he was going to fight immigrants and he was going to build the wall and all of that. So that was a terrible decision by President Peña. We do know now that it wasn't his idea, but anyway. So this relevance of Mexican presidents, it's a tough job, they have to. But let's go back to Vicente Fox. I like what you say, because he was very tough. Who was president in the US between 2000 and 2006? George Bush. Did they get along? Were they buddies? Fox and Bush? What did they have in common, these two guys? Horses, ranches, boots, all of that they could do. But then something damaged their relationship. What happened in the US that friendship was just kind of forgotten? In 2011. In 2001, I'm sorry. 9/11 came, and then everything was, what President Fox offered in that day, I'm not sure if you know, but he called President Bush and said, all Mexican airports are ready and open for your US planes to land, if you need them. I think only Tijuana actually did that, because remember the order was land wherever you can if you're on the air, or you're flying, huh? And President Fox said, President Bush, every Mexican airport, wherever, is open if you want to land. I think it was Monterrey and Tijuana or something. They were prepared. They could pretty much land everything everywhere. I think that more went to Canada actually than the US. But sadly, that didn't work very well, because 9/11 came and then Bush didn't remember who Fox was. I'm sorry, what?
In the video, it went by pretty quickly, but it sounded like one of the accomplishments that people were giving to Fox was more freedom of the press. And I was kind of curious if you could talk about, I don't know really what it was like before and after.
Thank you for bringing that up, because that is very important. And another gentleman there spoke about the Transparency Institute, the Institute for Transparency, which in US terms translates to Freedom of Information Act, that thing. So President Fox, and there's a reporter there, a lady who says, you know, when I was growing up, you could not speak bad about the president. And then I can see it now because I'm not that young anymore. So I would open, the Mexican newspapers would always have the president's face on the front page. That was what they had to have and what he did. Eventually all the other news came, but they were all, and then on the newscast at night, broadcast, the first news of the day was what the president said, where he went, where he ate, who he shook hands with. You know, everything was about the president. Now, you go to page 5 to see what Claudia Sheinbaum said on her, right? So that's very good. This non-centered presidential, even though it is a presidential system that works a little like a kingdom. And then, so the press, that is only changing now as we speak. We'll talk about that on Friday because they want to change the rules to control the press a little bit. But the fact is, today, if you open the newspapers and you read the editorials and the opinion pieces and all that, they can be very critical of the government and nothing will happen. You run more risk criticizing the cartel or the kingpin actually than the government. So that's a very good thing. And the Transparency Institute is something, like they said, that Vicente Fox also did, forcing the government to disclose information. You know, that's a big deal. It's like, we're going to create a law, and he was able to do that because he also had a congressional majority that came with his presidency. And he said, we need to make a law for the government to be forced to give us, the people, the information. And that was running very well and very proficiently until a month into President Sheinbaum's presidency when it was eliminated. We'll talk about that and several other autonomous institutes, independent institutes. So, I know I depressed you with the politics things. It's a terrible thing. I know until today you thought Mexicans were so nice. They say hello to everyone. You clearly haven't seen Mexican politics to believe that. Thank you so much. We will continue Tuesday and Thursday. Didi.
No, I see you all tomorrow, 9:30. Some of you are on Zoom and are going to be coming tomorrow. Some of you here are going to be on Zoom. Whatever you want is fine, just as long as you get the information. Thank you.